Newcastle United beat Wolves 2-1 at Molineux yesterday to go third in the Premier League despite not playing well once this season. There was a lot of issues again with the performance yesterday, and I'm going to go through them today in the very first episode of a new series on the channel. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Welcome to the very first episode of something that's a bit new on the channel. As I've mentioned in the last few weeks, I am looking to open up a membership scheme on the channel now that my channel has reached a certain milestone. This is an example of a video that I'm hoping to put behind the membership wall. It'll be free for the next few weeks just so you get a flavour of it, but this is what I'm aiming to do. So I'm just giving you a little bit of an insight into how I'm looking to grow the channel. But there is a new look series on the channel. As you know, I'm looking to do live reactions to games immediately or in the first 24 hours after games, and then I'll take a step back and look at the performance and look at one or two strands of that performance and give you some more in-depth thoughts and more calm, more reflective thoughts on the performance and the game. Obviously, we will not be going through the game blow by blow. We know what's happened already. Newcastle have won 2-1 thanks to goals from Fabian Schär and Harvey Barnes after Mario Lemina put Wolves 1-0 up at half-time. The first thing we're going to look at is the midfield. Now, Newcastle United have started not particularly well in games this season, and I think a lot of that is to do with the midfield, and a lot of that is to do with where the club wants to go and the team wants to go in terms of their playing identity. That's where what really the midfield is there to do. It's there to set the tone for any team, particularly one when you've got Bruno Guimaraes in there, you've got Joe Linton, and you've got Sean Longstaff, who started yesterday. I will start with Sean Longstaff in a second, but generally speaking, I think Newcastle have had issues with their midfield this season, and that's why their performances haven't been of the standard that they need to be to really match the results, which is great in one sense. Newcastle have found a way to win without playing well, but ultimately performances are the barometer of how successful a team will be, because you can't rely on results to happen and they're coming off disjointed performances as this one did again yesterday. Bruno Guimaraes was captain alongside Sean Longstaff and Joe Linton. Now, the obvious thing to mention is that Sean Longstaff started ahead of Sandro Tonali. I was advocating for Tonali to start. I think it was time. I said this on the live stream. If you haven't checked the live stream out yesterday, please do go and do that. That is where you'll get a more overview of the game. You'll get a bigger reaction to how the performance was, your feelings, my feelings. That's how that'll work. But this is more to do with how I think analytically Newcastle did well or didn't do well, and particularly in this game I don't think they did particularly well, and that came from starting Longstaff over Tonali. I think Tonali obviously has been out for a while. It was mentioned on the live stream yesterday that it'll take time to settle him in, but I think he's had that time now. I think he played well against Nottingham Forest I think he started in that game, and then he came on against Tottenham, did okay in spells, and then played I think 2 games for Italy, particularly with that assist for DiMarco's goal in Paris, showed that he's really sort of ready, and Luciano Spalletti was singing his praises for 2 weeks. I think he is ready to start a Premier League game. He should have started, in my opinion, yesterday, and I think that's ultimately where the negativity of the performance started, because Sean Longstaff was poor. He made the mistake for the goal. He gave the ball away, and Wolves were able to transition. We'll get into the sort of makeup of the midfield battle in a second, but particularly on Longstaff, lots of people, and I've probably peddled this as well, suggest that Sandro Tonali is an upgrade on what Sean Longstaff can do, but I think yesterday actually proved he isn't the case. Sandro Tonali is much better at playing the ball forward. He's much better in possession. He's much better at doing things that Sean Longstaff can't. But he isn't just better than Sean Longstaff at what Sean Longstaff can do. He can do other things as well, and I think that's what Newcastle lacked yesterday. Because of the way Wolves approached the game, the midfield battle was always going to go this way. Newcastle were always going to have the possession. Wolves were going to try and set traps and hit them on the counter-attack, as Newcastle did successfully in March at St James's Park when they won 3-0. Wolves tried to do that, and they didn't have much joy in the first 20 minutes. Newcastle were dominant. They were passing the ball really well, passing it forward very well, really sort of crisp and They were working well. When Bruno Guimaraes lost the ball a couple of times, Joe Linton was covering for him. There was a physicality there that had everything it needed. It was energetic, physical, and able to control the game for the first 20 minutes. Then Wolves' traps started to come through. Bruno kept losing the ball a little bit. I think he was a little bit jaded from his travels to South America. You can sort of mitigate for that to a certain degree. Joe Linton stopped being as effective in terms of winning the ball back and imposing himself on the game. And Longstaff just lost his way a little bit from there. And Wolves' traps started to win the game a little bit, and they started to get a bit more joy. And that's where the goal came from. It was a transition and counter-attack. And to fully go against that, to fully mitigate against that type of setup, you need to be confident on the ball, playing the ball forward, and getting around the pitch, which is exactly what Sandro Tonali does. And that's exactly why I would have started Tonali. And I think ultimately that midfield makeup doesn't work. And you could understand that Eddie Howe made that decision and understood that decision, because he made the change at half-time. He brought Tonali on, he took Joe Linton off, and he brought Joe Willock on as well. And Willock obviously is a different makeup of midfield. He is dynamic, energetic, pacey, stretches teams going forward, and just gives a different dimension to the midfield, which I don't think anybody else does in that midfield. You know, you've got the power and the physicality of Joe Linton, you've got the guile and the creativity of Tonali and Bruno, you've got the sort of running power of Longstaff in terms of getting around the pitch. But in terms of going forward and stretching teams, Willock is the only player who does that. So that's an option as well going forward now that he's fit. It was great to see he was able to get onto the bench yesterday after what was quite a scare when he came off with a thigh problem against Nottingham Forest because of all the issues he had last season with muscle problems. So the fact that he came back so well and slotted into the team seamlessly in the second half was a positive. But the midfield needs to be better generally. This isn't just about Molineux. This isn't just about Wolves. It hasn't been imposing enough yet. Bruno isn't hitting the levels he's hit so far. Joe Linton's had a difficult season as well so far, I think. Newcastle need to get Tonali in the team as soon as possible. And I know that lots of people will point to the fact that Tonali had issues last season against Brighton, particularly playing alongside Bruno. There were questions about whether the pair of them could link up together because they're too similar. I think actually they were working at it pretty well by the time Tonali's ban came along. The PSG game, they played particularly well together in that midfield. So I think that Newcastle can get Tonali and Bruno back into that midfield again. And ultimately, that'll be the reason why Newcastle will be successful going forward, is because they'll have that midfield, they'll have the physicality. And I think Tonali and Bruno have shown that they can be fluid together, they can rotate, they can, Longstaff and Bruno try and do the same thing, but Longstaff isn't good enough in possession, he isn't good enough on the ball to make it work. He made 2 forward passes yesterday at Molineux, and one of them led to the Wolves' goal. He didn't make any against Bournemouth a few weeks ago as well. So there's a need for Newcastle, because they're not trying to win the ball high as much and be as intense all the time as they were 2 seasons ago. Eddie Howe has spoken openly about trying to change the way that they play, trying to dominate the ball a little bit, control games a bit more, not exert themselves too much physically. They need to be really good in possession, and the fact is that they're just not good enough for that yet. And that is why ultimately they're struggling, and that's why Tonali needs to come in as soon as possible, and he should have started yesterday. I think the fact that he came off the bench really suggests that Eddie Howe understands that, and he knew that there was an issue there. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if Tonali starts against Fulham and is ready to go against Manchester City, where there's a little bit less pressure on terms of keeping the ball. Newcastle will have to sort of adapt themselves, maybe go back to playing a higher intensity, higher octane pressing game like they did 2 years ago. They've given Man City good games at St James's Park because they're able to get in behind them. Whereas if they go for the possession game, I think they'll probably come up and stuck against probably the best team in the world at doing that. So Newcastle will know that they've got issues to come away from this game with. And I think the worrying thing is that it's as good as it is that Newcastle can still win games from these positions, and as good as it is that they can still find their way forward, it is a bit of a problem that they are still having the same issues. They once they got turned over yesterday, and once they lost that, succumbed to that Wolves midfield battle. Andre and João Gomez were fantastic in that first half, and at the start of the second half as well. once that happened, they didn't really recover from it, and that's the same issue. They don't have any recovery pace in defence. That's where the goal came from as well. There's still the same problems are very much there as well. And there are other issues as well. Midfield, though, that's the problem for me. They don't have the ability to keep the ball enough because Sean Longstaff's in that midfield. As much as Longstaff has a role, I think, in the squad and has something that he can bring, I think lots of people have been very, very easy and very, very quick to rule him out of being worth anything for the team going forward. We've seen in the last couple of years, last season, Newcastle struggled in midfield, and he was the reason why it all fit together, because he allowed Bruno to dictate things a little bit more. I think things have moved on a little bit. I think teams have worked Longstaff out a bit more. They're putting a bit more pressure on him. He isn't good enough in possession. Doesn't play enough forward passes. That's what Tonali brings, and that's why Newcastle will eventually find their feet in midfield and will eventually become a much better team once Tonali and Bruno are playing together once again. There are a couple of other issues I wanted to talk about as well down in other positions. I think left back and right back are problems for Hall and Livramento. Livramento is a good player. He's obviously going to be Newcastle's right back for the long term, but I think you've got to question Eddie Howe's decision to start him all the time and then change for Trippier during these away games when they're not breaking teams down. Wolves and Bournemouth. Maybe it's better if Trippier starts straight away, and then there's a change further down the line in that regard. And on the other side as well, Hall is good going forward, poor defensively. There was too much coming down Wolves' right-hand side in that second half when Newcastle had taken the lead, had changed things. But I also think that Lloyd Kelly is a better option down that side. I'm one of these people who understands what Eddie Howe's trying to do with that defence, and has understood what Eddie Howe's trying to do with that defence for the last 2 years, in that he's played Burn at left back. I'm not advocating for Burn playing left back before anyone says anything, but he's played Burn at left back to have a back three when Trippier goes forward and maintain Newcastle's solidity and physicality and height. He can do that with Lloyd Kelly, who's a much more athletic version of Burn. Quicker, he's much more physically ready to battle quick wingers. I think that's what I would do in the next few weeks. Is I would put Kelly at left back and possibly Trippier at right back, but mainly Kelly at left back, because as good as Lewis Hall is going forward and as good as he will become, I think as a defender at left back, I think ultimately he isn't quite there ready for the Premier League as a left back, because defensively he's caught too much. I thought he was good against Southampton in spells, but lots of people pointed out, and they're right, that lots of the same thing happened. They were coming down their right hand side. It keeps happening. So I think Kelly needs to be the man who starts at left back. Alexander Isak came off at half time with a potential nose issue that we don't know how long that's going to last. Eddie Howe was a bit coy after the game. It might be that Manchester City is the game that he next plays in. So Newcastle needs to figure out what they do up front. And yesterday they moved Anthony Gordon central, brought Harvey Barnes on. Eddie Howe deserves a lot of credit for his substitutions he made yesterday. They ultimately were part of the reason why they won the game. Getting Barnes on to score that winner from the left has proven the right decision. But I don't think that should be the way that it should start the next game. I think that Newcastle lacked a focal point with Gordon up front. I think it takes him away from his best position as well. I think Newcastle should be a bit more aware of what they need when they don't have Isak or Wilson. They still need a focal point up front to sort of give that physicality that you take Gordon away from the left. He isn't on the left, so he isn't doing what he's best at, and he's getting lost in the game because he doesn't have the physicality. Yes, he can play as a number 9, but he isn't really right for what Newcastle need in terms of bringing other players into play. That's what Alexander Isak does. He drops deep, he links the play, he links with the wingers, he links with the midfielders. That's how Newcastle need to play, and the fact that Gordon can't do that is a bit of an issue. I would start against Fulham Will Asula if Isak isn't fit. I would start Will Asula, and I would start Barnes on the right, and I would start Gordon on the left. I think there's an issue there. I've spoken about this on the live stream yesterday about whether they regret buying Harvey Barnes, but as he's been as important, the goals he's scored have been. The fact that they spent £40 million to back up a £45 million left winger when they don't have the same level of strength on the right is becoming an issue, because now you're in the position where you have to play one of them out of position just to keep them both happy, and they are both playing well enough to start games, and then Jacob Murphy was really poor yesterday, I thought, as well. Didn't offer anything, even though I understood the idea of starting him because there was lots of space in behind both Wolves fullbacks to hit, so you wanted a more direct runner on both sides, which obviously Gordon and Murphy are, but it didn't quite work. And I think the fact that going forward, to keep both happy, you have to play them both, but to do that you have to play one out of position, kind of calls into question the idea of signing two strong players on that left and not signing a stronger player on the right. We all know this is a deeper issue, but going forward I think that's probably the way it'll be. I think crucially they need to start Asula, even though he isn't ready to play regular Premier League football. The fact he's physical, the fact he can bring players into play, the fact he can do things similar to Isak in that regard will help Newcastle going forward. And I think that rather than trying to play Gordon down the middle, which just simply doesn't work, it's never really worked for Newcastle because he doesn't have that physicality and that focal point, that ability to give a focal point to the team. So I think that's where Newcastle are going wrong. That's why the team isn't playing particularly well. There are issues there to be solved, but it's a great thing that they're picking up these wins despite not playing well. They're into the top 3 in the Premier League. It's the best start since 1995. We all know what happened at the end of that season. So hopefully Newcastle can make a really good season out of this and can find their feet and can find their performances to prolong it going forward. Thanks so much for joining me on this very first episode of what I'm going to find a name for it, the Monday debrief type video. I'm going to come back every Monday or Tuesday, depending on when the game is, and give an in-depth thought process on how I thought Newcastle's performance happened and how I thought Newcastle went, where I think Newcastle went right or wrong. Thanks so much for joining me. Like, share and subscribe. There'll be an update on the membership scheme coming this week, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.